Luke Northmore, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, man, all good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited.
Luke, you started playing rugby at 15 at Tavistock Rugby Club. Shout out to the Moorlanders. And obviously at Tavistock School as well, where we played grassroots together. You then went on to play at Cardiff Met University, debuted against Saracens in 2019. 2 years later, you then won the Premiership Rugby Final against Exeter Chiefs and have since been called into the England training camps for both the Six Nations and the Summer Series. What are you most proud of to date?
Wow, good first question. What am I most proud of? Probably, obviously on like the very superficial level, like winning the biggest competition in England is like something that everyone aspires to as soon as you become a professional. But actually, probably the proudest thing is the journey that got there, from like you and the boys at our school being like, come along and play. Like we need numbers. You'll enjoy it. And like I only went to those sessions because of our friendship more so than any interest in rugby. And then like what that's subsequently ended up being in the long run is probably the thing I'm most proud of. Is like getting to do it as a full-time job is pretty cool. So
you just joined for the social side of rugby.
Yeah, well, when it was like 15, 16 and we were finally allowed to try, it was like our parents were happy with it being a safe environment at the rugby club. And if anyone knows Tavi, the rugby club's so far away from any trouble. You're in one building, aren't you?
Oh, that's funny. Let's just touch on then, like winning the Premiership final. Then the score is 40-38 to Harlequins. The clock goes red, the ball's kicked out, and you've won the Premiership Rugby Final. What's going through your mind?
At that point, when like the ball goes out, you actually have no idea what's like. If you ask me now and then, I was like, I've got no idea what's just happened. Everyone's jumping on each other, shouting, screaming. There's like a picture of me like holding Marcus Smith and Danny Kerr like small children, like on my days. And nobody has a clue. There's lads like lying on the floor in disbelief, and no one has a clue what's just happened. It's probably maybe the bits leading up to it, like waiting for the ball to be kicked out. It's like those bits where you're like so scared, just sat watching the breakdown, because not everyone's involved in that bit at the time. You were just like waiting for the lads to kick it out, pass it to Marcus or Danny to kick it out. I think Danny kicked it out at the time. It's like waiting and just like, please don't mess this up. Somebody, please don't mess this up. And then it goes out, and it's probably the relief. Just that's why lads are lying on the floor. People are jumping around. It's like, it's finally over. The stress is done.
I think it's stressful enough for me watching as a fan, let alone you actually being there on the day in the moment. Talk me through the preparation that you go through when, and I don't mean like the tactics and the strategies of the game, but you as an individual, the mental preparation for going into a game as big as the Premiership Rugby Final.
I actually don't think there was a huge amount of preparation for me. At that point in my career, I was probably only a professional for 2 years, maybe.
Which is crazy in itself.
And COVID had hit, so we kind of were like, the professional life stopped for 6 months like it did for everyone, and I just went to live in a normal life back in Cardiff doing nothing. And yeah, I remember a funny story from the night before is that Sean, my partner, and I, we were playing Mono Deal. Do you know the card game? It's like Monopoly but cards. And and she ends up like wiping the floor with me, and we end up in a huge argument about it. I think she's like showing off. She's obviously just like, she is winning and gloating slightly, but we do that when we beat one another at the game, and we end up in a massive argument. She's like, I'm going home, not doing this. And like, we finally settled down, and once we won, I think we finally realised that I was probably a bit more nervous than I let on. It was like, I wasn't nervous walking over to the stadium, wasn't nervous during the week for the thing, but the night before when I boot off about losing a game, I probably was a bit more nervous then.
How did you go then? How did you transition yourself from, this is a big moment, like I can maybe acknowledge and recognise a level of nervousness within myself? How do you switch on to that game?
I don't think it's like that hard, because it means so much to you at that time. Like, throughout every week, you trust that by the time you get to the weekend, you've done all your jobs and done everything you need to do. And for the biggest part of the season, you do that every single week for 30, 40, 50 weeks. And then the final is just he's doing exactly the same. It just happens to be on a much grander scale. So I tried to spend the whole week just thinking it's very similar to like it was the first game of the season. And that first game of the season, Exeter absolutely ran rings around us, scored 40 points on us at home. And so all I had to do was just think about what that was. Like, it was the first game of the season again. Don't just do your normal job. Don't try and do too much. Don't let the occasion get the better of you. And thankfully, somewhat did that.
So you're trying to almost put some logic towards the situation and saying to yourself, this is the same as I do every week, and almost trying to take away from this, I don't know, the additional pressure of it being a final. And you're like, no, it's just a normal game. It's a normal team, and just going through the routines as usual.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing that can happen with a lot of players is you immediately go from thinking, right, this is now a final. This means so much more than it did. And in theory, it is a win or lose. You go home. If we had lost that game, I'd be sat here absolutely gutted now, being like we threw an opportunity away. But in the grand scheme of things, if you look back in the big picture, it's another game of rugby. I've been playing that game since I was 15. It's another pitch. And it's really cliche to say all those things to yourself at the time, but you really have to try and... Some people will try and take the pressure away by, belittling it, like a little bit like I've done, where it's like, this is another game of rugby. And some lads who maybe are more equipped with dealing with like the larger stages and the bigger pressure are like, okay, this is it now. I have to be at my best, and that's a challenge that they'll take head on.
Do you individually have any like rituals or habits going into games at all?
My only ritual is to try and not have a ritual. Like, I got in my head, like, I've seen so many people, like I remember like growing up, I've seen and chatted to like Henry Slade, who like puts boots on in certain fashion, like he'll put a sock on and left, right. And I thought, if I get into that situation where I spend so long trying to make sure that everything's perfect, then the day that you can't do something is the day that you then start overthinking it and worrying and stuff. And I can imagine probably from the uni days where the professionalism was so low, we would drive 5, 6, 7 hours on a bus to play at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and drive all the way home. So you don't have the luxury of making sure that everything's perfect like we do now. Like, we don't have the luxury of turning up to the hotel the night before, having all your dinner cooked for you, spread out on the table ready. So it probably has worked as a blessing for me in the long run. Is like, now when things go wrong, I remember I played my Premiership debut against Bristol before COVID. Must have been the week before we went into lockdown. And the bus driver went the wrong route to go to the game, and we ended up not arriving until 20, 30 minutes before kickoff.
How much did the other team pay the driver, do you think?
Yeah, people who was driving over Clifton Bridge thinking, the stadium's nowhere near this. It's like, this isn't right. But a lot of lads were like, oh my God, I've missed my prep time, I've missed this, I've missed that. And I remember getting off the bus and just being like, well, I'm pretty used to this, like things going wrong and just strapping boots up and going and playing. Like, there'd be days like when we were 18 at Tavi, you could turn up literally 5 minutes before kickoff because you were running late. Yeah. And you just turn up and play. And that's probably the best thing that's happened to me, is being able to just do that rather than like worrying too much about superstitions and rituals. And
it's even like not having the level of optimization. I think for me personally, when I don't know, even before like a podcast or like a big day at work, if I've got a big presentation, like I have found that I've relied on going to the gym in the morning and doing a walk and doing a cold plunge and all of these things. I noticed that if there was ever a day when I couldn't do some of those things, I'd start to have in my back of my mind, but well, I'm going to be rubbish now. Like, I've not been able to go to the gym this morning, or I've not been able to do that. That means that automatically means that I'm not going to be able to be myself and, come across as my best version in that call or in that podcast. And it's only until recently that I've been injured and not been able to go to the gym, and all of those things that I did have now been taken away from me. And for the first couple of weeks, I was like almost manifesting the poor performance, even though it had nothing to do with those habits and rituals. And now a few weeks have gone on, but I haven't done them. And I'm like, I now don't have the reliance on them whatsoever.
Yeah, well, how easy is it for everyone for like one hurdle to like come in the way and be like, oh, actually, I'm not going to do that as well as I would have done if I had. And don't get me wrong, if I would much rather now go into a game or a training session or even anything in my life with making sure that I've taken all the correct steps. But if you really whittle things down, it's like your ability to do the thing that you're good at or the thing you're most passionate about only comes down to you wanting to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's great that you get to go to the gym. It gives you like a huge new lease of energy and you feel like you come into the podcast like refreshed and ready to go. But it's like, you can still do that even though you can't go to the gym. It's just you haven't realized that until you can't do it. So
let's talk about your maybe mindset. How do you think it's changed from youngish lad in 2019 going into your debut to where you are today, training with England, having won the Premiership World Cup final?
Wow, we're not there yet.
Premiership
I wouldn't
final.
Mind. Wow.
How do you think your mindset's evolved from when you first started to where it is now? And was there maybe a moment that you thought, I really do have to upgrade or evolve my mindset to push forward in my career?
I think so. I think at the start there was probably I needed to do a lot of growing up quite quickly, like especially around my professionalism and the way that I approached the game was because from uni, what I thought was the right way to do it probably wasn't. Like the things you get exposed to when you first arrive at a professional club, if you're on feet, especially in pre-season 4 or 5 times a week, running loads, the running levels I just wasn't equipped to at that time. And that's no disrespect to the uni game it's more just the sheer quantity of what you need in the professional environments. You are just doing a lot more training. And it probably took me, I don't want to say a couple of years to figure it out, but I definitely had to sit back and think, all right, I need to, invest quite heavily into this now. And because at the start, I never really thought it was going to go anywhere. Do you know what I mean? I thought I might play a year and then I'll probably have to move on and go somewhere else or like go back to studying and get a different job. Like, it was never like, okay, I'm destined to be a rugby player for the rest of, for the foreseeable. So, but the biggest tournament was probably maybe around that first Six Nations. I finally got I had established myself at that point, like, okay, I can play in the Premiership quite well. And then the opportunity came to go to the Six Nations, and I was still only 24 at the time, maybe something like that. And from there, I was like, okay, you go in with the best of the country, and there's the best players doing the best things. And those guys probably show me that you can't leave anything to chance. Like the extra recovery, the extra fitness, the way you eat and things like that. Like those sort of routines and trying to do the right thing every time probably would pay off in the long run. And I guess I'm still probably working on that. And there's loads of athletes that do that. So there'll be a small minority of lads who are very good at being 100% all the time, but that's not human, is it, for anyone? So
what was it like going into the England training camps and essentially being surrounded by some of the best players in the world at that time? I'm going to assume that there's probably a level of like imposter syndrome going into an environment like that.
Massively. Even this most latest time round, I've been a professional for 5 years or so. I was 27. I'm 27. Like, I went in. I should be feeling confident. I play against those guys every week, and I still went in being like, "Wow, I don't belong in this group of people." Like, it was you're almost not necessarily starstruck because you kind of get immune to playing against huge names and stuff, but more just like, wow, I'm doing pretty well here. Like every time I go in, I think, wow, I have no idea why they're picking me to be in this squad. But especially the first time round, I was young. I hadn't had a really good season that year, but other than that, I was kind of like slowly just like simmering under the radar. And then when I went in, it was like, oh wow, this has to be 100% all the time. I mean, it was like really intense, and it probably at that stage I probably wasn't quite equipped for it, and it didn't didn't help me. I ended up getting injured quite quickly after that first Six Nations. Probably tried to do too much to stay in the environment when my body probably wasn't used to it. And then I paid the price, and then from then I ended up getting hurt quite regularly.
I almost didn't want to dwell on the injuries too much, but obviously I think you've seen your fair share of injuries over the last few seasons. And I think it's, from what I've seen as someone that's known you for the last like 10, 15 years, or however old we are now, you've demonstrated this huge amount of resilience in terms of bouncing back from these injuries time and time again. What's that experience been like for you?
That's probably the hardest part of the job and like the rugby itself, and there'll be loads of people in the league that have been through that, and it's crazy for a lot of people that they don't see how many people have been through it. Like there's so many lads who have like, unfortunately picked up like back-to-back injuries and stuff, and what it takes away from you at the time. Obviously, one, you're not on the pitch doing the thing you love and the thing you get paid to do, but it's so much more than that. You end up spending like a huge amount of time on your own because you're not on the same schedule as everybody else. It can be crazy lonely. You obviously have all this much more free time to sit around and dwell on your thoughts.
Think about things, yeah.
Yeah. And
what's one of the biggest things that you've learned about yourself during during some of the lowest moments? What have you learned about yourself?
I have to stay busy. There was a big portion of about 2 years ago now, probably. Yeah. I like fell on back-to-back injuries. I had quite a serious like chest and lung problem, and then as soon as I got fit from that, I broke my arm and was out again within the space of. Well, I played 20 minutes of rugby and went from one injury to another surgery to being out, and that spiraled me completely.
Because it was literally like out for months. You just got back on the pitch, you played for 20 minutes and then injured again.
Yeah.
Out for months.
And that was probably the biggest moment where I spiraled of like, wow, I didn't have a clue who I was because my whole identity was around like playing rugby and being on the pitch, and everyone knows you as the guy who's like good at rugby and plays rugby. And then instead of being that guy, you become the guy who's always injured, he's always getting hurt. And I had to learn quite quickly from that. It's like I can't sit around on my own all the time. So when the most recent injuries come up, like last year, once I had my ankle surgeries, I tried my hardest to be in and around the environment, set like a good routine of getting to work for a long period of time, like get in at 8 o'clock like everybody else, do my prep, do my recovery, go and sit with the boys, try and be in and around the lads. I did a huge amount of work with a guy, the Quinn psychologist called Sean, and a fellow who has since left Quins called Jack, who were amazing for me to try and compartmentalize that, the injury isn't the only thing that's happening in my life, and try and focus on more than just that one thing. But yeah, I suppose you do learn a lot about yourself. I'm not sure you can really sit and I don't think you can say, I've learned that I myself am extremely resilient, because I feel like anybody in my situation would do that, but that's only because that's how I react to it. Do you know what I mean? I feel like maybe the resilience is kind of how people view it from an outside perspective, but yeah, as I say, the injuries situation is quite a difficult one to, like, you never really know what you learn about yourself, and I won't until maybe like a few years down the line when I'm hopefully out of the injury spiral and be like, oh wow, I did some good stuff then to get to where I am now.
So interesting, isn't it? Maybe it is actually hard to learn or to recognize what your learnings are in the actual moment.
Yeah,
it's more
massively.
Looking back on the experience and maybe I learned this and that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you say, I probably will in a couple of years' time, and I have probably like a year, 18 months on from the big injuries that comes. Like I have learned a lot from myself, like what I'm capable of doing, and probably more so what I'm capable of like asking for help and being a little bit more vulnerable to telling people when you're like really struggling, or getting around your mates, or just needing days where you don't want to be surrounded by rugby and in work, and like it's okay to probably be like that.
Tell me more about asking for help and how useful that's been.
Yeah, it's massive. You get to a point where you run out of your own answers, don't you? When you've experienced, like, I ended up having 3 or 4 surgeries in the space of 18 months, 2 years or something. And by the last one, you're like, okay, I've got no more answers here. Like, I don't know how to get out of this rut of constantly getting hurt, not being able to be on the pitch, not performing and stuff. And it's not necessarily being like going to people who have been in the game for ages and say, how do I stop getting hurt? Because if everybody knew the answer to that, it would be fine and nobody would ever get hurt again. But probably more just to say to the lads and to Sean and my family, just like, today's a pretty rubbish day. Like, can we go and grab a coffee? I said to the lads quite quickly after the most recent like big ankle surgery, like, I'm real bad at being on my own. Like, can we, let's just grab coffee or like, we'll meet up. And I'm really fortunate I have a good group of lads at Quins who we like meet up and have cups of tea. We, someone will bake something different and we'll like just sit around and enjoy each other's company. And you probably value that a lot more than you recognize at the time. Like, to turn around and be like, okay, these days are pretty tough ones. Like, things can be going really well. Like the recovery can be going super well, and then you go to the game on the Saturday and the boys play amazingly and everyone's absolutely buzzing and you're devastated because it's not going. Like, you just want to be out there playing. And some weeks I would just text the team manager and be like, I really don't think I'm up for coming to the game. And like, as goodwill as some fans will be, like, they're interested in your recovery and this, that and the other, but like people shouting across the thing, when you back fit, blah, blah, blah. It's like things like that. Just that constant reminder that you're not doing the thing that you love is really difficult. So I learned to be able to like take a step back and just be like, okay, I can't show a brave face all the time, and that's absolutely fine.
I think it's so interesting I think there's a lot of stigma around asking for help and showing a level of vulnerability. I think from my own experiences of just challenging times and hard times when my mental health's really struggled, the times that I have been vulnerable and maybe opened up, just being like, do you know what, like, I am actually having a really shit week, I'm having a shit day, or maybe it's been like a shit period of time. When I have actually done that to friends, it's almost given them the level of comfortability that they're okay to do it as well. And obviously, of course, they're going to help you in that situation and help you get through that. But at the same time, I've also found that they've then been like, do you know what? I'm also struggling with these things as well. And it's so good that you hear it from both these kind of professional teams where that's happening, but obviously in like day-to-day life as well. Do you think, being a professional rugby player, it's obviously like a very male orientated environment, what is the, I suppose, like situation around mental health? What's that conversation like with a big group of lads that are all going out there and lifting heavy weights and playing rugby? Obviously, in my mind, I've got that stereotype of men don't talk about mental health. What's the reality in that environment?
I think, as for me personally and as Harlequins, like, we're incredibly fortunate that we have created an environment, and there is an environment around where people can be quite expressive. I think there's always like the cliche of like we're very expressive on the field, like the way we play, like we like to try new things, do like different styles, and we're not hugely scripted. And I do think that probably resonates off the pitch as well. We're very lucky to have like a good support network around, in like the team outside of the team, I suppose you could say, the backroom staff, etc. But the boys themselves have created a really good environment where if you are struggling, then there's no additional judgment. I think you would be surprised if you came into the environment and witnessed how like welcoming it is and how easy it is to be vulnerable and be yourself. And we're quite heavy on being yourself a lot of the time. And as I obviously alluded to, my friend, like the closest group of lads that I've got at Quins, like, we have a great relationship to tackle those things, to talk about our issues. Like, I've never been in a group of lads who are so open to be like, actually, I'm having a pretty shit day, and we'll just sit and have a cup of coffee and a or a cup of tea or something, and you say a problem shared is a problem halved, isn't it? That sort, and it actually is really refreshing to be like anyone in your 20s or 30s, or like, growing up and linking to the the podcast, like trying to be an adult, and just to be able to share those things with someone is hugely refreshing, I think.
What advice would you give someone that's never really done that before? They've heard it on podcasts, but they've never actually sat down in a room with someone and gone, I'm having a shit day or a shit time, or I'm struggling with something like this. What advice would you give them?
I think you have to take the pressure away from it. Like, as you say, like, if you were to say to someone, oh, sit down in a room with someone and tell them about your feelings, etc. It doesn't need to be so black and white. It doesn't need to be so written down. I need to sit down in front of Adam here and be like, mate, I'm really, really struggling. So call the lads for breakfast, or your friends, or whoever it might be, ring your family and just have a chin wag. And then these things will naturally come up in conversation when you allow them to. I think we're quite quickly to say, to like you could go through this whole conversation with something that you really, really want to get off your chest, and just not allow yourself to say it. Just go and take the pressure away from it. Go and grab a coffee, sit around, ask how your family's getting on, this, that, and the other, and then just be like, I would really like to talk about this. I hope that's all right. And it, as you say, most people, like your experience, as soon as you finally open up and say to someone, it's like people's ability to help and to be attentive and probably even a lot more understanding is quite shocking how open people are to help as soon as you ask for it. And it is scary, isn't it? Like, everyone's scared of it. I remember the first time that I went to the lads in a spot of bother, and feeling like you didn't really have much going on, and we went for breakfast, and then I was just completely vulnerable. But then afterwards, you're like, oh wow, these boys have really got my back. And it's exactly the same with Sean. Like, if we're sat at home and I really need, we're feeling a certain sort of way, I know that we can just it doesn't need to be 3 hours long, and you don't need to ever leave a conversation like we've solved every problem under the sun, but just to get it off your chest, and for someone to sit with you and be like, I'm really sorry that this is happening. I'll be here if and when you need me. Then it's like, what more could you ask for?
Most of the time as well, when I'm having a shit time, I don't even want them to give me the solution. I just want to fucking say it out loud.
Yeah.
I literally just want to rant. It's like, it's not usually big things. Even just if I have a rubbish day at work, I'm just like, I just want to tell someone and rant at them for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And then I'm done. I'm good. And I think, that's maybe in a short-term example of shit day. But if you are going through a hard time, I think the question you got to ask yourself as well is like, what's the worst thing that can happen by me bringing this up to my friends? I'm not gonna lie, if you open that up to your friends and they start taking the mick out of you, you probably got the wrong friends. They're probably not emotionally mature enough to be able to handle that. And that's probably not the people you should surround yourself with. So I feel like if you're going, do I actually want to open up? It's like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Maybe they're not able to help you through it, but the likelihood is they're probably going to want to help you. They're probably going to be supportive. They're probably going to give you that feeling afterwards of, oh, I feel a little bit lighter now.
Yeah. As you say, you'd like to hope so. You'd like to hope that anybody in life, if someone needed a hand, you would help as much as you could at that time. Like, I know that it's never as easy as that, but I'd like to think most people are relatively decent people who want to make people better.
I remember when I came and watched you play against Bristol back in May, and I think Quins were contending for top 4. You're in a position where you've got to win every single game left of the season just to make it into that kind of top 4 at the end of the season. I think at the same time, Quins were the furthest they'd got in the European Championship. You'd got through to the semi-finals against Toulouse, who I think later actually went on to win. And I think you ended up losing that game against Bristol, and obviously I was there and we caught up for a beer afterwards, and it seemed like you'd been through a a period of time where there was this like continuous pressure. We've got what, 6, 7, 8 weeks, maybe like 2 months of we've got to win every single game now. Talk me through what that experience is like when there's just this, and it's not even just big like pressure and big moments. This is like week on week on week on week continuous pressure where you have to perform as a team, but obviously as an individual yourself. Like what's that experience like?
It's like a double-edged sword. I think the one side of it is it's hugely exciting. Like in any sort of job or any form of life, being involved in like the big moments is like unbelievable. You get to play in every game that really matters, and there's something on the line, and that makes it really exciting. To watch your team be involved in these massive games like the European quarterfinals, the semi-finals, like taking those runs on, is so exciting to watch and be a part of. And then the flip side of it is emotionally, it can be so draining to be one moment you're all the way up, next minute you've got to come back down. Before you know it, you're back up to peak again. It's like emotionally, it takes its toll, and it's incredibly difficult to try and get the best out of yourself every single week. Like I remember after that game, it was like we were just in an emotional roller coaster of like 1 week we beat a team we were never supposed to win against, and then we go and we've got to then travel 4 hours up to Manchester, on a Sunday afternoon to a place that's like notorious for being a really hard place to go and play, and you've got to try and get back up again and win, and then you don't because you start slow and you don't really know the answer at the time, and then you come back down, you win again, you come all the way back up like we've just beaten who then went on to win.
Just endless.
And then you go, right, we've got a European games to get ready for, and you go, and the European game at that point was like, this is make or break, this is like the end of the year. If you win this, you go into a final, and anything can happen in a final. We lose to the team, like to a better side. We were definitely in it and could have like gone, and we could have won, but to lose to the team who wins is never that bad. It is just the emotional roller coaster of just being up and down, and I have no idea what the answer is to not burn out like that, but somebody does, and I think maybe just like learning year on year. If we're in that situation again this year, I'd like to think we probably do things a little bit differently, and probably personally you do things a bit differently as well, where you try and make sure that you plan ahead, you prep. We do things like a little bit cuter every time. You take the next day to do your extra recovery, because it's super hard to be involved in massive games every 7 days where your body feels terrible at the back end of the season. It's like you probably got to try and gain the 1% somewhere. But yeah, it's hugely exciting, but it can be absolutely draining.
I considered it from a week on week perspective of like you win a game and you lose a game, but even like during the game, you score a try, you're in the absolute place of like, I don't know, ecstatic energy, dopamine soaring. Maybe you've run the length of the pitch and you've scored, and then 10 minutes later the other team scores. So even actually within that 80 minutes, your emotions are flying sky high to sky low, and then obviously you've got the prolonged period between those games as well.
Yeah, fortunately the game itself is the easiest part to not view that like emotional roller coaster, because you're never playing as well as you think you are, and you're never playing as badly as you think you are at the time. So you find that sort of balance, and it's very easy it's not easy on the pitch, but it's easier on the pitch to not view it as like a grand scheme of things. You try and like narrow it down to just the next 2 minutes or the next job and this, that, and the other. And it's probably easier to compartmentalize that aspect, where it's like the only thing you think about at the moment is this one game. And to be able to like stay on track in that game and stick to your game plan, although it's like you're never going to do that 100% of the time, you're going to make mistakes, so things are going to happen, you're not going to be at the races and stuff. You don't necessarily feel the highs and lows. There's definitely times the game just like drifts away from you and you're like, oh my days, what's happened here? But in order of like, I guess probably because the duration is only in 80 minutes, you're not like down and out. You know, as soon as they score, you're not like completely depleted. It's like, right, we've got to find a way to get another job in. You know, go and win the next 2 minutes, and then the next 2 minutes, and at the end of the game, you just hope that you've won more of those 2 minutes than the other team.
I think there's a really big learning in the philosophy of next job. You hear it a lot in rugby, and it's like maybe in the post-match interviews, people are always saying, yeah, you know, this happened, but you know, you stand up and you think about the next job. I'm thinking even when we were younger, that's what you get told is just like, what's the next job? And I suppose there's no point dwelling in the present moment. If something's going wrong, you've made a mistake.
Yeah, as you say, we probably heard next job from, you know, 15 onwards, like, and it is so important. And I think probably the way that people view it is like the next job of like the team has to go and be like to score or do something. But when you break it down individually, and it took me a while to learn this, and I've been trying to help a few of the younger lads who have like just coming into playing like a lot of games, you can only do the next job that's you're going to do your next job, so you can't go and hunt for another job that isn't out there. So like whether that's, if your next job is to catch the kickoff, that's your next job. Just catch the kickoff properly, you know, do set up however your team wants to do. There's no point in you deciding then in the moment that, right, my next job is, you know, taking this ball, trying to go off script and run 10 meters away from everybody else and try and score in the corner, because that then becomes you go out of your job, and then somebody else can't do their next job, which is just as important as your job. And it's like that steamroll effect. And it is well hard, isn't it? Like to try and not think of the things that have just gone. But I suppose that is the same for everyone. It's like if you spend too long looking at that, you'll do the next thing wrong. It took me 3 or 4 years, especially from uni. I'd become very stressed of like, if I made a mistake, I'd just sit and think about it all the time. And like, I worked with people to try and find ways to, I used to like roll my socks up and down to like use that as like a marker to wipe the floor, because I would just get in my own head, oh, I've messed this up. And then like the more you practice it, like just focusing on what's in front of you and what you've learned in the week and what you know, what you've trained all week for. So just doing those things is normally always enough.
Wonder why I always see players moving their socks around.
There's so many different
mental. It's almost a moment of mindfulness, isn't it? Because you're like, I'm not going to think about everything else that's going on. I'm literally just going to focus on pulling my socks up, and that to me is telling my brain that this is a wipe the slate clean from here.
Yeah, loads of people do so many different things. I mean, I remember I started, it was like if I would like miss a tackle or like, you know, it would make an error or like knock the ball on or something, I would pull my socks up and down. And then it got to the point where I would think about that so much that if I wasn't involved in the game for the first like 20 minutes, I'm pulling my socks up and down. It's like the game hasn't even come to me. I've not actually made a mistake, but I'm worrying about.
I'm on the bench still.
Yeah, but it's like so many people do so many different things, and it is literally about wiping the slate clean and thinking, and it just being like, right, that's gone now. What's my next action going to be? And it's like sometimes you never know what the next action is going to be, but as long as when it comes, as long as you do the job as well, you never know if it's going to be a tackle or a carry or a kick or whatever. So as long as you do whatever the game brings to you, as long as you do the next job pretty well, then it's like, that's always the process I try and take.
Just picturing me now in the office when another shit day, just pulling my socks up and down over and over again. But I do think there are some learnings there. Is there anything else that you've noticed or picked up, either on yourself or that maybe you see other players do, that helps them to almost perform when things aren't going well and wipe that slate clean?
Yeah, I've never really like chatted to lads about it, because it's not like a superstition of like some players or something like that. It's like some guys like to just keep what's in, you know, what works for them kind of to themselves, and you don't want somebody turning around being like, imagine if we were playing now, like, oh, pull your socks up and down. It's like, oh, okay, so you think I'm bad as well? Then like, it's like it gets quite difficult.
Yeah,
but as you say, it's like you don't. Like the thing about the physically and mentally is like they're so closely interlinked that doing those small acts of like physical stuff to help you mentally is so important. Like whatever it is you need to tick off, like for example, you saying how you love going to the gym and stuff in the morning, and you feel like that helps you. Like, that's not just because you like to stay fit and active. It's like those things help you mentally. It's like, right, okay, I've had a great start to the morning. My dopamine's super high because I've exercised, and then the flow on effect from that. And I guess it's no different in those small moments of just doing something as simple as pulling your socks up and down. It's like, right, I've done something now, which has set me up back to my base, my equilibrium, or whatever you want to call it, like my middle ground. And from there, I can now go and take the step forward rather than feeling like I've got to climb up from the bottom of whatever that is, making a mistake, being in a bad mood, having a bad day.
What's the best advice that someone's ever given you from a professional capacity that's really given you that edge?
Giving me the edge. There's been a fair few people who have like helped me along the way. My friend Tom Lauday once put it so bluntly. It's like, like I said earlier, you're never as good as you think. You've never played as well as you think you did, and you've never played as badly as you think you did. And that really does resonate loads. It's like just being okay with the fact that you're never going to be as good as you want to be, because you're always going to keep striving, and you're never ever as bad as you think you are. You always just you catastrophize and make it loads worse.
That's so interesting, because it's like, don't catastrophize the bad days, but also be humble about the really good days, and you think that you are.
It's like he would always say, don't take the highs too high and the lows too low, because you'll never. The higher you keep taking the highs, you're never going to expect. Like if you keep thinking that everything's amazing, one day it will come crashing down, and then vice versa. You keep, the lows are never as low, in the rugby sense as you think. So yeah, there's been a lot of lads. Obviously, there's a huge bit around the injuries, etc. It's like there's a lot of it. It's like there'll be lads who, maybe you feel like you have put loads of work in around your rehab, your resilience. You ticked off all your boxes. You've done everything right, and you would, I still get hurt. And there'd obviously be lads who their recipe of what works for them doesn't include like the things that you think it would, like the extra recovery, the days in the afternoons in the sauna when you really don't want to go, or the extra bikes, blah blah blah, whatever it might be.
I mean, a day in the sauna doesn't sound too bad.
try heavy exercise, and then straight into the sauna whilst your heart rate's elevated. It's tough. But those that were like 1% that you try and like tick off, so sometimes you just shit out of luck, and being able to like put that to one side and not compare, being like, well, such and such doesn't do this, and he plays loads, and I do this, and I get hurt all the time. It's like, well,
do you find yourself comparing yourself to others? Obviously through like the injuries, you're like, I've done as much preparation as that person, but even from like a performance perspective and maybe just life in general, what's that comparison?
I think it's hard to not in the world that we live in now. Like everybody is always comparing themselves to everyone. Like it is real difficult. I try now and not compare myself in like a negative way to the other lads. Like especially if haven't played for a while, and I'll watch training or I'll watch games, and I'll see one of the boys do something like amazing and be like, I wonder if I was in that situation, I would do that. Like, and you always say, I probably wouldn't. I'm probably like, that's not the sort of player I am. I'm not that good enough. But now I try and watch it as like my comparisons is like, what do they do well that I could probably do fractionally better? What is it that they like? How can I take bits from them and this player and that player and make me a better player? But you say it is well hard to not compare yourself to someone, like, and the things you see online or like when you watch it, was like everyone looks like everything's amazing in it. So yeah, the comparisons are always there, but I suppose you try and not dwell on them too much.
I think comparison is probably one of the biggest biggest like thieves of joy, both from a perspective of life, because you can see people that are having these potentially amazing looking lives on, say, like social media, for example. But I suppose in your cases, you get to watch them day in, week in, week out, playing well or playing not so well. And I suppose there's always that constant reminder of that's what I want to be doing, that's what I could be doing.
It's hard, but like, don't get me wrong, it's like it is watching lads like be amazing and stuff, being like, oh, maybe things would be different if I wasn't injured, or this, that, and the other. But the flip side of that is somebody else is thinking that about me when things are going really well for me and I'm playing loads, and like everyone's going to have that sort of day where it's like you watch someone do something, it's like, oh wow, I'm never going to play. I'm not going to play in this team for the next few weeks, whatever, because Luke's playing really well, and it really is like at some point everyone's going to compare themselves to someone. So I try and not view it like I'm the only person who's going to be like sat watching, being like, oh my god, I'm never going to survive these. If he keeps doing this super well, I'm never going to play again. Blah, blah, blah. So all I can do is be as good as I can be, and like you really have to try and think about it personally. Like I always try and view it. I forget. I might watch what these guys are doing and how well they're playing and things like that, and I'll try. And then it's about, well, for now, nobody knows how big my ceiling is and how good I can go and be, because I haven't been able to showcase it for X amount of time. And, one day, touch wood, I might end up being able to play 20 games and showcase to everyone how good I can be. And then there'll be somebody else being like, oh, wow, I'm comparing myself to him, blah, blah, blah. So
what are you doing and not doing now that you think your older self will look back on and regret?
Regret? Wow. I think probably now, the last like 2 years is like I've tried to like step away from everything being like rugby, which I wish I had done a few years before. Like I like bought a guitar 18 months ago or so, and just was like, right, I'm going to learn to play the guitar. It's like I've always wanted to play and I've always wanted to learn, and was like, why don't I just buy a guitar and do that? And now that gives me such an escape from like feeling like the only thing that I can do in the world is like play rugby. It's like I want to step back and like learn something new, test myself, something that's not completely, sport related. I want to be able to learn to play the guitar and then teach my kids in the future like skills like that, which I think would be awesome. Probably the bit I would regret a few years ago is not starting sooner, of like trying new things and like stepping out of like feeling like the world just revolves around rugby.
It's almost creating your identity outside of your career.
Yeah, which is really hard, that sense of like, because rugby is so full on, and it really does matter to you as an individual, but it can't be all like, it's not healthy for it to be so consuming of who you are as a person, that you have to be who's Luke outside of the game, and like who's the friend, the family member, the things that he can do and offer people outside of the game. So probably the thing I probably would change is like starting that stuff sooner.
And what are you most grateful for in life at the moment?
Ooh, wow. Probably my family, my partner, my friends, like those guys around me is probably it's like a huge reason of, it's not the reason why I do, like it's strange when people say like, oh, why, like what's your why? It's like, oh, I obviously want to make my family proud, my partner proud, like all my friends, like we have like a bit of a crazy story of like, joining rugby quite late and becoming a professional and stuff, but ultimately there's like a huge part of it which like I'm a competitor and I want to be the best I can be. But those guys are the people that keep me the most sane, the most grounded. Like they don't let me, take the highs too high and the lows too low. Like we've talked about, like being able to like ring my mum and just talk about nothing to do with rugby and just be her son or be the boyfriend or be the friend who, like that's probably the thing I'm most grateful for, is the outlets I have from when rugby and stuff gets tough, or life itself gets pretty tough, like those guys around me. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Luke, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a
Mate,
pleasure
thanks for having me.
chat
Enjoyed
with
it.
you. Happy days.